Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Cookie Pocket, episode 116. I'm a man who refuses to learn his lesson, and I'm joined by my usual co-host, Christian and Mitchell. Today, we are going to be discussing Dario Argento's Inferno. This is a pseudo-sequel to Suspiria, which is probably his best remembered movie, in that it expands upon the idea of the three mothers, which isn't really present in the original Suspiria, but this kind of lends dimension and a world to kind of the mythology set up in that original film. The story is quite loose, but as it stands, the overall plot is about a young man who's studying music in Rome and gets a letter from his sister who says, "I'm living in this apartment building in New York and there are spooky goings on." So he returns to America to help her investigate the spooky goings on. And would you believe it? There are some spooky things that go on. And that is essentially the film in a nutshell. But while I strap on my boxing gloves, I think I'll hand the reins over to you guys. What did you guys think of Inferno?
Wow. Christian, settle down.
Settling.
Christian is a rancor right now. He is going to end Zach's career by eating him, escaping. And he's going to make me, his owner, very sad. Well, I forgot everything that happened in Suspiria. In case anyone was wondering, I don't remember when I even saw it. I remember what it looked like, though. And I actually remember, like, distinct images from the film. So I'll lead in with some positive vibes and say that the style was very discernible. It was very clean cut throughout. It was like you could very easily expect certain stylistic choices when it comes to the cinematography and the production, obviously, even though it's cheap and dumb, it takes advantage of what little it has. I enjoy kind of the elemental, like the wind, water, earth, fire kind of elements to it. And well, obviously the fire is like the big thing.
Yeah.
But and I guess sort of the creativity of the kills and stuff. I mean, I guess this kind of gets into my criticism. I'm sorry. That's pretty much
No, go ahead. That's what this is for.
So I think every scene that doesn't have something actively happening in it is either literally straight up exposition or it's strictly supporting a different scene that may or may not have any relevance to that scene that is and a really cool idea of somebody dying or somebody finding something or a really dumb riddle. And that's basically the three types of important scenes you'll find throughout the film.
Okay.
And it is a discernible structure, like the style, right? However, there is no real momentum with it. There's nothing really to latch onto that makes the average audience member interested in it. It's kind of just like a whole bunch of people were suggesting to Argento to do a little bit more, and he was like, no, we have to have the boobies and the water and the drowning and the dead corpses, and it has to happen. It's just the way it is. The red and blue, put the red and blue. And that's basically, I can tell it's like a very director like centric film where it's like if he does not get his vision across the exact way he had a nightmare about it after a long bender or something, then he will spontaneously combust if this vision does not happen. And that is a positive trait. So the style and the pursuing the vision are very determined. How determined he is to get this vision across is apparent. But there's no story, really. Everything that we've talked about in Suspiria is still true. And it's just annoying. And I laughed sometimes about how ridiculous it was. And I wasn't laughing because I was having a good time. Maybe a couple times, but I'd say out of the 10 times I laughed, 8 of them were because I was disappointed.
Okay.
2.5.
See, this is interesting, Mitchell, because I think that's very fair, and I agree with pretty much everything you said. So, and yet I gave the movie a 4. So I think this is going to be an interesting discussion. But Christian, what did you think?
Well, Zach, I've been watching a lot of good movies lately because the Criterion sale came back around. You know, I threw on La Haine, the new 4K of that, which is gorgeous. I watched another Herzog documentary the other day.
I picked up his autobiography from the library today.
Oh, okay. Yeah. You're distilling my wrath a little bit here with that. I wish I was talking about one of those rather than this film, because time is so fleeting.
Tell that to Paul Blart.
Yeah, no, and I made latching onto Mitchell's laugh point. I had laugh moments like that I swear were identical in sound to some of the joyless laughs you had when we forced you through Paul Blart.
It's probably true.
But you know, I'm a reasonable man. I love democracy. I love the Republic. So I gave this a 1.5, not a 1. Even though I think on the level it's probably worse than Suspiria to me. There's certain things that are less egregious than they are in Suspiria. I think the dubbing and the ADR in general is, admittedly, there's less dialogue here to begin with, but I do think it's better incorporated. It's less clunky where the sound and the mouths moving are so disparate. I think what bothers me is just the story stuff and the gobbledygook. And with Suspiria, I was being kind of a grumpy little Gus that doesn't like Italian horror. But this time, I felt more that this was an authentically bad film, I think. The lighting's still nice at times, but there's so many lines of dialogue. I swear, the best comparison I can make is, I feel like Mitchell when you asked him to describe the story of David Lynch's Dune.
I always think about that.
That's the cookie pocket illusion benchmark for me here. And you know, I watched this a few days ago now, in part to calm my anger and just let it sit for a little bit. And this definitely could be a 1. I think The Beyond has better kills, for example, even though I gave The Beyond a straight up 1. I think some of the ideas here in the kills even are not terrible ideas, but they're not very well executed. Especially, I'm sure we'll get into all of these in depth, but the one where the corpse keeps bobbing up on her, I think is a terrific idea where she's kind of like scrambling to kick it away. But I think the corpse looks like something you'd buy at Party City, and it just didn't work at all for me. The one moment that totally works and is like legitimately terrifying is the like window guillotine thing. That is great, and that on its own earned 1.5 stars. So, but the story, it's hard to describe how ridiculous and nonsensical it is because there's just, all you could really do is recite the silly lines of dialogues like, his heart hurts. Maybe he needs heart medicine or whatever the hell that was. And the frickin', at the beginning, they were talking about the mothers who are actually stepmothers, as if that's supposed to explain some facet of anything. And there's just these awkward turns where things are maybe lost in translation or I don't know. But I don't like it, man. I don't like it.
I think it's interesting you mentioned the guillotine kill as the one effective one, because I kind of thought, I think the most typically affecting like horror movie moment in this is there's a scene where the guy who studies music, his name is Mark, he has a friend named Sarah, and she, after he gets the letter from his sister, who also has a name, she goes back to her own apartment building in Rome, and there's a whole saga in her apartment, and she ends up being stabbed multiple times. And he walks into her apartment and is looking around. Where is she? Where is she? And she has kind of like a curtain against one wall, and you just see kind of like an indentation against it at first, and then she tears through it. And I think that's really well paced. I really like that moment. So I do think it's interesting you point out the guillotine as like the one effective one, because that's the one I would have thought of as like a moment you would have discussed. I think this movie, more than any other Italian horror we've covered, because at this point we've talked about Suspiria, we've talked about The Beyond, we've talked about Black Sabbath. This is our first returning Italian horror director in Dario Argento. I think of the four, this one is the most kind of laid back and loose with its narrative. And for me, I'm fine with that, because when it comes to Italian horror, I'm not really looking, when it comes to a lot of movies, honestly, even things like David Lynch and some more experimental kind of horror films, I'm not really looking for a strict 3-act A to B to C linear kind of adventure, which some films do provide, and that's fine. But I go to Italian horror, especially kind of dreamy fantasy Italian horror, for like a warm Technicolor bath that I can just sit in for a while and enjoy the atmosphere of it, because I think that's where Dario Argento's strength really lies, is in creating these atmospheric settings and these bizarre visuals. I think so many of the locations in this movie feel like they came right out of like a nightmare or a fairy tale. Like the room full of water at the beginning, I think, is a great kind of concept. The library that, as you go into the basement, becomes like a warlock's laboratory, I think that's a great setting as well. And I will admit that the first time I saw this, I didn't like it, because the first time I watched this movie, I gave it a 2. I had seen Suspiria about a month or so before and really quite enjoyed that. And this to me felt like there wasn't really a story. I didn't really get it. I didn't know what was happening. And so it also didn't help that I put it on entirely because my roommate was taking a long time in the shower. And I wanted to use the shower, so I put on a 2-hour movie at like 11 at night. But anyway, but coming back to it, because I've seen it 3 times now, I see more details in it and more motifs that really do feel like the deliberate suggestions of something to come. And I think this film is kind of done a disservice by the fact that the third film in the 3 Mothers trilogy, Mother of Tears, is A, really bad, B, came out 30 years later, and C, doesn't really resolve any of the stuff that's set up in this film. So this is almost like if The Two Towers came out and then 30 years later, somebody totally different made Return of the King with an entirely different cast and a bunch of different ideas. So everything that's set up in this movie doesn't really have a payoff. I don't want to get too far into the reads, though, as we're discussing story. I do want to discuss the loose narrative of this movie. We've kind of talked about how it's hard to follow, but did you guys by the end feel that you understood where we started and where we ended up and kind of how we got there? Or did you just feel totally lost in the sauce throughout?
I was not lost in thine sauce, dear Zachary. Okay, this just reminds me of another major point. The film keeps beckoning me to realize that it is a film. It is an Argento film, and there's nothing that's immersing me in it. I understand, like, the calm gothic vibe. I'm a big Typo Negative fan, much more so recently, so I'm much more into gothic metal, so I understand. However, when it comes to a story that's guided or brought about by something or motivated by some character's own motivations, or there's some sort of reason to invest, I lose it all solely because I know there's going to be another kill. It's probably going to be a woman that's not entirely dressed, and it's probably going to be some creative way she died, and it's like, we have to get to this point somehow. Like, we have to walk into the curtain, we have to see this guy's eyes out and freak out and drop the candle and then get enveloped by your own curtain and fall down the glass. But we have to realize how we have to get there first. Who cares about the story? We have to care about how does the story get to here? And you kind of just feel that same pace the entire time. Now, it doesn't mean there's not any continuity or anything, or that there isn't a background story to follow or something, or that there isn't some lore involved, or there's any motifs or anything. it's just very frustrating when you know it's going to come back to that same formula over and over again. And I think that's where the problems begin. I think the lore is fine. It's not like it was just written off and it was like, this is something that we just came up with in 5 minutes. But I do think it was very much taking a back seat to all the things that we mentioned already, especially the atmosphere being like one of the main reasons to keep watching, I guess.
This is really interesting because, again, I totally agree with you. I think
I'm a politician. What can I say?
I think that most Argento movies are kind of just a gallery for him to hang some neat ideas for scenes in. But I think as somebody who really admires the technique and visual artistry of these movies, that doesn't bother me because I'm there for the neat scenes and the cool shots and the set pieces. And it's like going to the circus. Like I go to the circus to see the lion act and to see the bit with the clowns and to see the gymnastics. Oh, I just smacked my lamp. I go to an Argento movie to see women fall through glass windows and things catch fire. And, I go to see all of these fun set pieces and moments and visuals. So, but yeah, I understand how that could be a drawback. Christian?
I go to Argento films because you forced me to.
Yes. I keep bringing
before
you to the
I answer
gallery.
your question, if you hear, audience, furniture shifting or dogs barking, it's because Argento is still haunting my house, clearly. But no, I was lost in the sauce. The story lost me very quickly. I got all the gobbledygook in the first 5 minutes where they said Suspiria Yama Lama Ding Dong, and then I was like, oh, I guess this is a sequel now. And then the three mothers are a thing, and then Homie was like checking out Cat Girl instead of the music girl to his right, which should have been the move. You went for the wrong, or he was looking in the wrong place. Anyway,
he was bewitched.
I didn't even realize he was what's her face, the other woman who has a name. I didn't realize he was her sister, her brother, until he said so with like maybe 20 minutes left in the movie, and then I sort of got some of it. But
the first
I was very lost.
He's reading a letter from her.
Maybe I tuned out. I don't know, man. I was having a lot of trouble. What was the other half of the question? Right, the funky vibes and it's like the circus. This is what I come to. This is why I'm here. I think maybe with that line of logic, if I were to rewatch Suspiria now, I really don't want to rewatch Suspiria. If I was forced to, I think I might give it a conciliatory 2 with that in mind. And I do think like some of the fun technical things you're describing are more present in Suspiria than they are here. But just generally speaking, I don't find them fun. I don't often find them extremely well executed in terms of their craft. And I feel like, especially in this one, scary moments came across as kind of silly to me. Like the cat thing where there's like 3 little kittens scratching him. That just felt like it was like a cute moment. I don't know. Yeah. The story, and I read your review and I read your sort of thing about what Guillermo del Toro calls like, I forget what he called it, but something to do with this fantastical acceptance of setting and exposition. And you likened it to the magic mirror or the evil queen in Snow White. I still think that the evil queen and the magic mirror are so much more digestible concepts that click very easily with an audience. Maybe a Disney film isn't a proper comparison to this because they're doing very different things, but I think that film is designed to be accessible, whereas this film doesn't really care. So on one hand, you could say that's not a point of criticism for me because it's not what it's trying to do, but sort of like how I said with our Suspiria episode and our Beyond episode, I still feel like there are some basic cinematic benchmarks that must factor into my score making, as they are inevitably a massive part of my viewing experience.
I'll also say, sorry, Zach.
No, go ahead.
That the cheesy dialogue does not bother me that much because it's consistent enough. The acting is bad, but consistently bad. And it's something that you can come to expect. And there's some like good acted moments, but I have to make this comparison again. I'm sorry, Zach. We're gonna have to have an entire Cookie Pocket episode dedicated to a video game. But Silent Hill keeps coming up over and over again, right? These dumb riddles about like under the soles of your feet and stuff. I totally get. I totally understand, because why would I have to find a key in a drain in a hospital and get a hook with a string to find that, and then fighting these nurses outside and stuff? Why, like, that doesn't make any sense. And in Resident Evil, one of the most famous quotes of all time, this is put on t-shirts a lot. Jill, you almost became a Jill sandwich after she almost dies from a room that collapses on her. Or Silent Hill, when James Sunderland walks in and talks to this kid. You're eating pizza? The world's ending outside and you're eating pizza? Let's just point out the fact that it's hard to translate into English sometimes. And sometimes these things don't come across right. So I accept these cultural distinctions. But that also doesn't mean that the story is not dumb, and that it should be taken much less seriously than the film takes it.
Ah, that's a good point. Yeah.
I guess I'm okay with the film taking itself seriously, because I think this type of film, this sort of fantastical, mythological type thing, if it didn't take itself seriously in that regard, I don't think it would work for the concept, regardless of whether or not you feel it works at all. I think there would be another layer of it not working if it didn't take its own mythology seriously, since the whole movie is based in the mythology. I will say, I think there is a joke in this movie that actually does come across and is funny, and that's he was talking about three sisters. Oh, you mean those black singers? Honestly, that whole set piece, in that whole sequence in her apartment where the neighbor comes to her apartment with her, I think that's the strongest sequence in the whole movie, because it introduces this concept of the power going on and off. And so the opera that she's put on keeps kind of cutting in and out, and the power and the lights keep cutting in and out as well. And I think that's a really strong idea for a horror set piece that is executed well in that case. For those who have not read my Letterboxd review, which Christian alluded to, I mentioned a documentary I watched recently from last year called Dario Argento Panico, which is a documentary on Argento's works. And in it, various filmmakers who have been inspired by Argento, including like John Carpenter and George A. Romero and Guillermo del Toro are interviewed. And del Toro says that the strength of Argento's stories lies in what he calls the power of the statement. And he says in like a fairy tale or in a bedtime story, when you hear something like, he says, once upon a time, there was a princess who lived on top of a mountain made of glass. You don't go, well, why does she live up there? How does a glass mountain work? Where did the glass mountain come from? You just accept it as being part of the story because that's what the storyteller has written. And so it shall be. And I think that that's kind of the best entry point to Argento's mythology, at least in his more fantastical films, because they are bizarre and they are weird and they are dreamlike. And if you think about it too long, they do have a lot of hanging threads. But I think that's all part of establishing like that fairy tale dreamlike vibe. I do think that Suspiria does it better in a lot of places. And also Suspiria just goes, it has a harder line on the witch angle, and it's more into magic and folklore, whereas this is doing something kind of gothic and more haunted house and a little distant from that. But I do still think that that really works here. We've talked about music a little bit, but not as much as I expected. We talked about music in Suspiria, because Suspiria has a very iconic score by the band Goblin, which I'm very fond of. But you guys were not really when we talked about that film. This film has a different approach. The score is a little more typical for the genre and is by Keith Emerson of prog rock group The Nice, and later of Emerson, Lake and Palmer, who have created some of the most iconic album covers you've ever seen in your life. What did we think of the score in this?
Meh.
Meh.
It's very stylized and present, but the whole like Mitchell was doing. I don't remember if we were recording when Mitchell was doing it. The dun dun Suspiria thing.
Oh, I love that. That gets me pumped up. Gets the people going.
Rolled my eyes, man. I think both with regard to the soundtrack and just the film at large, it bugged me more that they were forcing this Suspiria connection that is pretty much immaterial other than the times they say the word Suspiria and allude to this idea of three mothers and suggest that the first one was in Suspiria. Other than that, this could totally be its own movie. And I guess if I enjoyed Suspiria, I would probably think that was really cool. But because I didn't, it just felt like another thing that was distracting, both for the soundtrack and the story, which I guess is supposed to not matter, but to me it does. So there.
Yeah.
Yeah. You know, there's not a lot of music here, so we're gonna put a little bit of synth because it sounds good and it's different. So that's probably what actually happened. And
Yeah.
There was some little licks I appreciated, but yeah, it kind of just lends to the spontaneity and like sheer incoherence of whatever's happening. But I will say for me, it was more of a supporting thing stylistically than it was a detractor or something that was distracting for the most part, because I was kind of expecting it. Which is weird because you can't really expect what the next song is going to be because there's so little, like barely any genre crossover. Like there's some little bits and pieces and you can tell some of the instruments are the same, but like some of the songs are completely out there. Either super creepy, like fitting the gothic vibe, or just like all of a sudden super zany even though nothing's happening, and then something zany does happen and then it like explodes at the end. I guess is the best way I can describe it as a layman.
Yeah, I will say I like Argento's approach to music a lot of the time. I think he uses very unconventional music for the horror genre, and I appreciate that because I think there are too many horror films that are all in like strings in the background. Every horror film has that like sound. So I do appreciate something different. I do think it doesn't always work in his movies. His film Phenomena, he licensed songs from he licensed songs from Motorhead and Iron Maiden and then plays them only in the most boring scenes in the movie. There will be like
awesome.
A wide shot of Jennifer Connelly standing on a box to get something off of a tall shelf. I'm not making that up. And there will be like an Iron Maiden song playing in the background for the whole scene. So there it doesn't necessarily work fully, I think. But here, I love it. The whole climax of this movie, I think, is kind of amazing in a way I didn't appreciate when I first saw it, with the whole building engulfed in flames. I also think the character of the architect, Valeri, I think is his name, but throughout most of the film, he's this old man in a wheelchair. We don't know who he is. Part of the story is that this old man built houses for each of the three mothers, and we're in the house that he built in New York. And there's this whole scene where he's in his chair and he has to plug himself into a soundboard for him to speak. And I think that's a great set piece as well. And the really operatic score during that section really works for me. Italian fantasy horror is definitely a difficult genre to approach sometimes, but when it works, I think it really works, and here it works for me. I noticed one of the Letterboxd reviews you liked, Christian, called this Dario Argento's Opera, which I think is funny because he has another movie called Opera, which is set entirely in the opera house in Rome, and they got permission to film there, and that's in the lineup for a season going forward. Who knows which one? I won't tell. Before we go to final thoughts, though, I did want to throw out a meaty question, and it's something that critics always kind of struggle with in regard to Argento, and that's the treatment of women in his films. Like we've alluded to so far, pretty much any time a character is killed in this film, not always, but pretty much any time, that character is going to be a woman, and usually the kill is really emphasized and lingered on and executed in a very over-the-top way. So there have been people who have said Argento hates women, and his films are him exercising this this hatred for the female form. And Argento himself says, I love women, and I love the way that women look, and the way that I employ them in my films is the same way that a Renaissance painter might paint a woman being tortured in hell to emphasize the fires of hell. What did you guys come away feeling uncomfortable, or do you agree more?
Save me, Christian. Save me. Go ahead.
To his partial credit, I don't think Dario hates women necessarily. In fact, I think Dario very much enjoys the company of attractive women because his cast is, well, come on. Let's not beat around the bush here. Yeah, I don't know. For me personally, I think this is probably something I took more of an issue with on Beyond and Suspiria, and I mean, Beyond's not Argento, but I think at this point I've just accepted it. Not accepted it, but at least acclimated to it or gotten used to it as being a feature of these. Yeah, I mean, I think the guy's, he's a man, and a man who likes women.
An Italian man, don't forget.
Yes, that's an important detail. I do not endorse what Dario does. I thought that fellow musicology student was kind of cute. And, if I liked this movie, then it would be fine. So I'm not going to pretend to morally grandstand over you, Zach, because I know you're not a misogynist deep down in that cold heart of yours.
Thank you. That's very generous of you.
Zach's always trying to get me canceled. I survived the Barbie movie, Zach. I survived.
You did, and
with
in
Amelia
flying colors too.
Yes, flying pink colors. Well, yeah, I'm gonna say I kind of just agree with what Christian said. Honestly, I think I feel like there's probably some cultural influence in there. There's probably some, like, this is kind of what he's used to, I guess, or like this is kind of the principles that he was raised on, and what he considers his passion is to see this happen. And I can totally see where he's coming from an artist point of view. It's not like there's anyone getting like absolutely harassed and abused beyond all recognition, or that there's any sort of point being trying to be made, and it's just like, it's all of it kind of flows under the same ideas. Like, it's not like my brain instantly switches and it's like, hold on, wait a minute, like this is not gothic and aesthetic at all, this is straight misogyny or anything. It's definitely worked fairly effectively into the story. Now obviously you have to point it out how much of a bias it is, and I think I appreciate that he acknowledges that bias, and I genuinely believe that's what he believes as an artist, and I don't think he's trying to say anything more than he was saying, I guess. Like it's just a movie. Like they're getting killed by these mythological things or creatures or people or something, and it's a horror story. Like, there's really not, like, the whole point I've been talking about, like, it's super zany, like, yeah, it takes itself seriously, but it's still like a mythological gothic nightmarish world. There isn't like some massive point trying to be made about, like, I don't know, like about women being targeted or something. Like, it's just there's nothing else to it other than that. But now I'll play devil's advocate for myself again. I'll also say that it's very much harder to look at it in retrospect. and we don't know the amount of consent that these women had, or what they really knew what they were getting into before the movie came out. All those things that you would expect in a film being made. So definitely like a case by case basis thing, but overall, I agree with his overall intent.
Bottom line, do I think Dario is radicalizing incels? I don't think so.
No.
I have this. I don't know if this is fair game to ask you this, Zach. You might have to edit this out, but I do want to ask you.
Yeah.
Have you shown an Italian horror film to your girlfriend yet?
We watched Black Sabbath together. And
that's a good starting point.
She enjoyed that one quite a bit, actually. Her favorite segment was the telephone.
Wow.
Because she said it felt closest to life and like something she could most relate to, which is kind of depressing, but also I think a fair argument. And then we also watched another Mario Bava together. We watched Blood and Black Lace, which we have not watched on this show, but that's much more of like a traditional giallo hidden killer with black gloves who stalks women. She was not as fond of that one, but the reason I started with Mario Bava is because his films are older. They're from the 60s, and so there's kind of a level of quaintness that makes them not quite as off-putting.
Sure.
So you're saying Zombie 2 is the next one?
Oh, no.
No, I don't think
now
I'm
we'll talk
go
about
into...
that, about portraying women. What the heck, man?
Well, I was going to mention that because I do think that the line for me with Italian horror as to whether or not I'm uncomfortable with it is what it feels like the intention is. And more often than not, in a Dario Argento film, the murder of a woman in the film usually feels like the point is to be a beautiful set piece, where the lighting and the movement and the act of the kill are visually interesting and stylized and appealing. That's not the case in a lot of Italian horror movies. In a lot of Italian horror movies, including some Lucio Fulci, who directed The Beyond and directed Zombie 2, which we watched, I think, before we were even doing the podcast. Yeah. In some of his films and a lot of other forgotten Italian horror films that are just kind of scuzzy and gross, the murder of women, and in some cases the sexual assault of women, kind of feels like it's in the movie just because a producer went, well, we got to get boobs in the picture. And that just feels gross and exploitative to me. And I don't usually have that issue with Argento films, at least not the good ones. Now, I do think there is a longer conversation to be had about the fact that most of the violence and leeriness that Argento inflicts upon female leads when women are the main character usually happens when the lead is played by either his partner of several years, Daria Nicolodi, who in this film plays the woman who's killed by the cats, the neighbor, or in the future when the lead is played by his daughter. I think there's definitely a very uncomfortable conversation to be had about that. And I think part of that conversation would have to be with Dario himself, but nobody's had the guts to address him yet in an interview about that. And I look forward to the day that they do.
You have to be the one to do it, Zach. Come on.
Yeah, yes, I'm gonna fly overseas and talk to a man who doesn't speak a word of English and say, "Do you hate your daughter?"
I believe in you, Zach. If anyone can do it, it's you.
Just learn, like, you have to memorize one phrase in Italian.
That would be great. Yeah, I won't know how to get to the bathroom, but I'll know how to ask Argento.
No, you won't know what his answer means either. But
yes. Alrighty. Well, I think that's all my main points. Anything else we want to discuss before we move on to the week in review?
Yeah. Just to put like one last pin in the whole misogyny thing, I still feel like even if I accept the logic behind the kill being a beautiful set piece, and I guess you could argue that the masculinity of a male hero like Indiana Jones sort of lends a grandiose nature to an action set piece, perhaps. But I still think there's this flip side where what makes that set piece beautiful is the fact that you're viewing the woman as basically a sex object some of the time. So again, there's a longer conversation to be had about it. I don't think we have time to do that now, but I just thought that was worth mentioning. I think my one other issue with this film is that it's often quite boring. Like, we've talked a lot about the scares and a lot about the clunky dialogue and the exposition, but it feels like there are like 10 minutes where basically nothing happens and then one of the kills happens, and kind of rinse and repeat most of the way through with some shorter or longer breaks. And it just lost me. I definitely approached this with a level of antipathy because I don't like Italian horror, but then I was surprised by it felt like this had less going on than Suspiria did. So maybe a different criticism than my finding it all disorganized as well. 1.5. At this rate, I feel like frickin' Dario will be like my most watched director on Letterboxd, even though I don't want to see any of it. So thanks, Zach, for that.
How many times we got to show the drips on the carpet? I feel like I saw it like 50 times. And how long does Mark have to keep going down into another level somewhere before he's finally done? That took like freaking 7 minutes. We have to clock that. That took so freaking long.
Yeah.
That was a pretty good track, though. I'm not going to lie. But
yeah. And this is touching on stuff that I do agree that this isn't the neatest film in terms of its construction, but we do keep touching on ideas that I do think the concepts behind this film are really rich. I do think this film is definitely saying something about, like, there's motifs around the three elements, like you mentioned, Mitchell. There's motifs around like descent, and I think the levels of hell are in there somewhere. Mm-hmm. Like I do, despite my disliking it the first time, every time I come back to this film, I do notice something new that I enjoy more. And it might not be like a forward-facing aspect of the plot that is in the foreground, but it makes me appreciate the world of the film more. And it makes me come away from it feeling like I got more out of it than I did the last time.
Mm-hmm. I also think I'm gonna have to bring up the misogyny thing again. Shoot, I think looking at the film where it's like, oh well, it makes sense that the women are doing this because XYZ is a poor way of looking at the film. I think a good, which neither of us, none of the three of us are looking at it that way, obviously, but. I think a good way of looking at it is sympathizing with the fact that there's elements of femininity and elements of masculinity, kind of what Christian alluded to with Indiana Jones, that may supplement the intended feelings of that scene. Mm-hmm. And sometimes it drills too far into the stereotype, but other times it modestly approaches the stereotype, not getting to the point of unbelievability or to the point where it seems like there's some other message there. And I think that is kind of, once again, kind of alluding to the Argento's, like, building the atmosphere. And I like, it's honestly, like I said about Suspiria, like, I don't really care anything about the plot or anything, but it's super duper memorable. Like the set pieces and everything are very well and intentionally set up. I think there's no denying that at all. It's just it kind of just has the same issues. Like it's not it's something to appreciate, to look at once in a while, but like if you fall asleep and wake up, you didn't really miss a whole lot. And I think that's what makes it a 2.5 out of 5 for me.
Okay. Yeah. I think to put the final button on the misogyny argument for the episode before we move on, I think that we can say that the whole aspect of kind of because there are Argento films where dramatic kills and set pieces are based around the murder of men. We just haven't watched those ones yet. But I do think
we're on a streak, Zach. Come on.
It's most often women. I think you can put down to a sexist bias. I don't think it's a mean-spirited bias, but I do think it's a bias along along the lines of sex. And I do think it's based in a very heterosexual worldview. I think is maybe a label that we can put on it. Dario Argento films, at least the ones we've watched, are very heterosexual movies in terms of kind of the gaze of the camera.
The gaze.
All right. Well, on that bombshell, I think we should move on to the week in review.
There are no gays on this camera. Not in my studio.
There is a gay character in an early Argento film.
No.
Is it a positive portrayal, Zach? Is it?
Honestly, it's better than you would think. And there's another one.
What is that saying?
We should watch Deep Red at some point.
okay.
That might be
Another
one
one.
that I bring to the podcast at some point, because that is a really interesting kind of opposite to a lot of the stuff we discussed about this film. And dear listener, if you want to watch an Argento film that kind of addresses a lot of the misogyny and sexism which we've talked about, or at least there's accusations, his movie after Inferno, Tenebrae, is very metafictional in that regard, and I would say is worth checking out. But we can review. What have you guys been watching or reading or whatever?
Okay. I've referenced the Criterion sale a couple times now, and I'm going to discuss Summertime, a David Lean film. We talked about David Lean's Bridge on the River Kwai somewhat recently, and that's one of our better performing episodes on YouTube. So I'll appease the Mitchell crowd. This movie kind of rocked me. This wasn't one I was going to pick up, but the YouTube algorithm forced me a video of a guy like recommending movies to think about for this sale. And Summertime was like, oh, Katharine Hepburn, Technicolor, romance, but unconventional. It came out in 1955, and I guess what really hits me about this is Katharine Hepburn plays a middle-aged secretary from Akron, Ohio, which is a big deal to me because I was born in Akron. My parents and my grandparents. My grandmother went to the University of Akron, and so did my grandfather. And I always remember my grandmother telling me the story that once she graduated from high school and was thinking about college and what was next, she was basically sat down and told by a counselor or someone of distinction that she had three choices. She could be a secretary, a nurse, or a teacher. And she was a teacher, and she was a great teacher at that. But just seeing a protagonist that I guess literally is from the same place, who presumably faced that same limited platform of choices, kind of made her sympathetic nature sink in even more. This isn't a comedy the way a lot of the earlier Katharine Hepburn films are. And the whole film, she's sort of... I guess I should set out the plot a little bit. She's saved up for this vacation to Venice, and the idea is she's been saving up like her whole life to go, and it's this going to be this big thing for her. And she's like the one kind of clueless American tourist the whole time, and there are a couple of comedy beats here and there, but it really is a dramatic, touching love story about this middle-aged to old woman, old enough to feel like she's super old, even though she doesn't look that old, and 48 isn't that old. She's constantly like making placating jokes about how old she is, the way that we might see our own grandparents or older people we're acquainted with make themselves in company. And the idea is she's a single woman and she's never like settled down or married or anything. And she has kind of this question mark romance thing with this Venetian guy, and there are different ideals of like conservatism, or at least taking one's time in a relationship versus enjoying what you have. And it's all photographed beautifully. I think the script is superb, and I think Hepburn is very humanistic. And it's a great summer watch. It's summertime. It's it really kind of fell into the sort of La La Land mold of movies and before trilogy land of like semi-tragic romance. But I really appreciated how unconventional it was that it starred this middle-aged older woman, and everything about it felt very mature to me. Its average rating on Letterboxd right now is 3.6. I think that is, it's not a bad average, but I think it's unjustifiably low for how beautiful it is, both visually and textually. And I would very strongly recommend it. It appears to be on Canopy, Plex, and Max right now. 2 of those 3 are free to most people. So even if you can't pick up the Criterion Blu-ray, which is great, this is one you should be able to access and enjoy.
Nice.
Middle-aged women, huh?
Uh-oh.
That was the takeaway.
I had to get something out of it.
Yeah, fair enough. No Alec Guinness this time. Alas.
That's so sad. Well, I couldn't think of any other way to lead this in.
What's
it's actually
the
pretty
bridge
depressing.
from River Kwai to this one?
It's Celine Dion.
Okay,
I saw that you reviewed that.
I am Celine Dion. Now, you guys might not know this, but I'm not that big of a Celine Dion fan. And
Color me surprised.
I recognize the songs. I remember there was this one movie, Titanic, that may have some relevance. But basically, I think this is one of the only pop star documentaries, at least that I can discern, that is, you can almost take away just as much from it, not knowing much about the discography. And I think that really says a lot about her character and the way that she looks at life. And I think it does kind of say something, but she recently got diagnosed with stiff person syndrome. And ever since then, like, it's like, oh, her life forever changed. But like it literally ruined her voice. Like, it completely ruined her only instrument and her entire key to fame. And her whole philosophy on it is that she was serving her voice, and that she wasn't playing an instrument with her voice. She was literally following her voice and where it took her. And it sounds super poetic and cheesy, but like, you can very clearly, like, just listening to her, and maybe it's just like the way that Canadians talk or something, but like, you could totally, like, I was totally enveloped. Like, I totally believed everything she was saying. It was a very honest, real take on her life, and also very humble too. A lot of the talking about her past doesn't actually come from her. It comes from just playing old clips from like decades ago and just showing like how enthralled the audience is and everything. And I think that is super, super engaging. It really says a lot about somebody's talent without shoving it down your freaking throat. And I also think her being, especially, not that she wasn't already humble, but especially humbled at the fact that she lost the one thing that was keeping her going. And she's still hopeful because of it. All of that is what makes it super enthralling. I will say that I gave it a 4, which is great, but I also think that there was a lot of pacing issues when it comes to kind of just like randomly bouncing back and forth with her life story. It didn't really make a whole lot of sense, like the way that they went about addressing different parts of her life up until, I would say, the last 20 minutes, because I don't want to like spoil it too much, but they show like episodes that she's going through and like actual, like, showing fully fledged her medical condition. There's a whole warning in the very beginning that talks about it. So yeah, it was just like, it makes me want to listen to her music a lot more. It doesn't make you feel great coming out of it. It makes you kind of feel like you saw something you weren't supposed to see. And I think that uncomfortable feeling is very hard to pull off, even for a documentary. And I think just kind of that raw take on her life without kind of spending too much time on any one success that she had. It just, the whole humble way it was directed it is very like adjacent to her actual personality that she's portraying. And they show like a whole like 15 minutes of her in the studio trying to do this one line, repeating this one song that she did before over and over again. And it's like, it's super depressing because it's like she keeps trying, and like there's parts that sound so good, like to the average listener, it's like she sounds like a freaking angel, but it's so depressing because you can see it and you can even hear it in her voice a little bit that she's not confident in what she's doing. And everybody in the studio is like, you're doing great. It sounds just like you would expect, like, Celine, you're doing amazing. And she's just like, no, I can't do this. I have to do it again. And it's just like, man, it's like, it's the most depressing like look on an artist that you could have possibly portrayed. So yeah, I was super into it. I don't know how I was super into it, but it definitely makes me want to listen to her music, and it puts a lot of emotion behind her work that even like her strongest fans wouldn't have known about without this coming out.
How did this get on your radar? What made you watch it?
Remember when I talked about Love Island?
I thought so. Yeah, just wanted to confirm.
Yeah.
Well, that gives me a transition into mine because something I definitely didn't watch with my girlfriend is, so in the lead up to Inferno, I wanted to set myself a bit of a challenge, and I talked through this whole thing in the review of the film on Letterboxd. Talking about Italian horror on the show in the past, sometimes I've found myself a little taken aback. Does the Emperor have no clothes here? Is this genre really wholesale crap, and I, am at the center of it defending nothing?
Does Al Capone shine my shoes?
And I decided... Christian is suddenly lit like he's in a Gordon Willis film. But I decided that I would give myself a bit of a test because Inferno has a notorious ripoff called The Other Hell, which if you know anything about Italian horror, you know the name Dario Argento, you know the name Lucio Fulci, and you might know the name Bruno Mattei because he's kind of a notorious hack who made very, very cheap ripoffs, movies that are generally considered bad. And he made The Other Hell, which is a very obvious ripoff of Inferno. The poster in Italy is very similar to the poster for Inferno. The title literally translates in Italian to The Other Inferno. So it's, it's obvious what we're doing here. The story itself isn't really that similar. The Other Hell is a nunsploitation film, but they're clearly trying to crib some of the lighting and set pieces from Argento. And I really was asking myself, okay, is this really worse than Inferno, or have I just kind of told myself it's worse? And immediately I thought, no, this is way worse. And it enforced for me why I like Argento's movies. And it comes down to a lot of what we discussed in our discussion on Inferno. It's the lighting, it's the atmosphere, it's the set pieces, it's the vision. Like it or not, there's clearly a voice and a directorial vision that goes into Argento's films. But Bruno Mattei has no vision. I said in my Letterboxd review that he shoots all of his films like depressing 70s pornos. Everything is shot flat and wide on a zoom lens in big white rooms so we can just zoom in and get everything in a single clumsy shot. The effects are really bad in a way that feels clumsy and rushed and slapdash instead of due to a cheap budget. And it's just not fun to watch. Kind of like I alluded to earlier, Bruno Mattei's films generally just feel kind of scuzzy and gross. His frequent partner, Claudio Fragasso, who wrote this movie and directed what is known as one of the worst movies of all time, Troll 2. If you don't know Troll 2, you have probably at some point seen the notorious YouTube meme, "They're eating her, and then they're going to eat me. Oh my God." That is from Troll 2. But even Claudio Fragasso's films, they're bad, but they're not like depressingly bad. His films are funny bad at least. But The Other Hell, 2 out of 5. I did not like it. And it strengthened my resolve going into my rewatch of Inferno and our discussion for this episode. All right. On that note, I'm going to turn tail and start running away. I've dropped my boxing gloves.
Yeah, you better run.
The fight has not gone in my favor. Time for the rundown.
The next time I pick a film I think Zach will dislike, I'll make sure to pick a week in review that somehow shores up my argument, too. Okay. Mitchell, you're starting us. Here we go.
All right, I'm ready. Spaghetti, let's go.
3, 2, 1, go.
Controlling New York.
4 out of 5.
So-called mothers that are actually stepmothers.
3 out of 5.
Key locations.
4 out of 5.
Women usually being the worst readers of this stuff.
2 out of 5.
Blue and red.
4 out of 5.
A very strange bittersweet smell.
3 out of 5.
Argento archetypes.
4 out of 5.
Kazanian antiques.
4 out of 5.
Floating corpses.
4 out of 5.
Cat-girl eye contact.
3 out of 5.
Assault by taxi.
4 out of 5.
Assault by door handle.
3 out of 5.
Verity.
4 out of 5.
NPC sports elevator man.
2 out of 5.
I don't know. She was already dead.
3 out of 5.
Spooks and stuff.
4 out of 5.
Needing some heart medicine.
2 out of 5.
Toxicology.
3 out of 5.
Musicology.
4 out of 5.
Cigarette awareness campaigns.
3 out of 5.
Rose's brother, Mark.
4 out of 5.
Quarter-inch cable choking.
4 out of 5.
Damn cats.
2 seconds.
2 out of 5.
Time. Ah, nicely done. Oof. Got a few
I think
left.
you'll know what the last ones are too.
Oh, yeah.
I'm sure I'll be able to identify them, yeah.
Identify these nuts.
No, thank you. All right, so next episode will be hosted by Christian. Christian,
that's right.
What are we talking about next time?
Oh, my goodness. Well, we are talking about the Magnificent Ambersons, Orson Welles' second film he made after Citizen Kane, one that is best known for RKO slashing away, I think, about 40 minutes from the edit. And that footage is lost to time, and also forcing a rosy ending that I think Welles initially did not intend. But I'm fascinated by Orson Welles. We discussed him in a very brief cameo matter because he had a cameo in the Muppet movie. And Citizen Kane is something I appreciated but didn't necessarily love. I've since seen The Trial and F for Fake and his Othello. And yeah, I think he's a very mercurial, fascinating cinematic figure that the three of us ought to discuss. So Magnificent Ambersons next time.
Have we really not had an Orson Welles movie on the podcast? I feel like
I don't think so.
Talked about him.
We've been missing some pretty massive directors on here.
Yeah, we don't have Spielberg. We don't have Wells.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well,
Those two.
The crazy part is I'm the one bringing him in. I thought it would be you, Zach. That's the crazy thing.
Wow.
Yeah, that's weird.
Yeah.
I think maybe I had The Stranger on a list at some point and didn't end up bringing it to the show for some reason. But yeah, I guess we're checking off a big name next time. So tune in next time. This has been episode 116 of Cookie Pocket. We'll see you next episode. Bye, folks.